Today's focus is a concept we call institutional Alzheimer's when it comes to the folks at General Motors and Bob Lutz relative to Tesla. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. Repeat visitor, welcome back. We also want to thank those of you who choose to like and subscribe. And we also wanted to encourage you to join us on Patreon for daily suggestions and ideas relative to better investing in Tesla. Now, I wanted to just review with you. So part of what our show is about is helping to forward the process of EV globally and its impact on what's going on. One of the challenges that I've been noting with multiple times a year shows is, well, what is the Bob Lutz take on what's going on? So the reason for that is very simple. There are a lot of core process concepts that have been developed by operating companies in the auto business around the world. And Bob worked for BMW, he worked for Ford, I believe he was at Chrysler, and he was at GM in a very senior role when he left. One of the interesting points is that a lot of the ideas that were set up previously are sort of part of the core institutional memory of those organizations. And some of those concepts at a core level are still occurring. So I recently watched an interview with the CEO of GM, and I also watched an interview with Bob Lutz, and I was kind of stunned at what I saw. And part of my goal is I don't want to see all those companies go bankrupt because they're kind of disorganized in what they're doing, hence our show for today and the shows we do relative to GM and Bob Lutz. So there was an interview with Bob Lutz, and the interview that he did talked about, and this is in 2019, and he pointed out that one of the main reasons that the Chevy Volt was brought to market was jealousy on the part of GM of all of the accolades the folks at Toyota were getting in the early 2000s from having developed the hybrid Prius and their electric vehicles. And so what he said was, we wanted to show them that we had some skills in Detroit as well in terms of delivering products in that space, hence the Volt. And then the Bolt was actually, the research had started at that point and delivered after he left. But there was still an influence on what their thinking was, because he's the one that pointed out that the Bolt was designed from a price standpoint to bankrupt Tesla by coming in 10 grand below what Tesla's price was, and therefore destroying them with that. The problem that he shared was that they didn't realize that rich people might want to drive electric vehicles, i.e. the Model S that Tesla came out with. He thought that the Bolt was the best iteration of electric vehicles because it'd be cheap enough that the people who were concerned about the environment would be willing to buy it. And therefore, it is kind of a dumpy vehicle and small when you put it side by side with a Model S. You know, there's no comparison in terms of creature comfort, size, et cetera, how it fits a family. So I was kind of stunned after I saw both the interview with Bob Lutz and the logic that he'd shared and some of the things that we saw going on. One of the things I'm worried about with GM is what I want to call the consumer institutional memory. So just to touch on a couple of well-known, well-written points, and we've done shows on this before. Did you know that GM, Exxon, and Firestone bought up all of the electric trolley companies they could in the United States back in the 20s? And then they systematically came up with reasons to destroy them and replace them with diesel buses, diesel fuel, obviously, and tires. And the result was, in particular, I keep focusing on what happened in Los Angeles. As you'll see, and I'll present the photo here, you have all these vehicles that were collected and destroyed. And obviously it helped GM sales, but one of the disasters has been that after they went to diesel buses and there weren't the transportation lines via trolleys usually development kind of emerges from where public transport is, and without these vehicles, instead of development being controlled in a way that people could commute without having to drive cars, it went the opposite, which supported the growth and success of GM, but destroyed all of this opportunity to control pollution. So it's been very interesting to watch how much of a thorn the sort of pollution folks in the California government have been to GM ever since. And an example of this would be that GM actually developed the EV1 product or equivalent product in 1990. And there was such a good reception to the prototype that they came out with the EV1. And the state of California basically told the auto companies that all of you would have to come out with electric vehicles, otherwise we won't let you sell cars in Cali. And because California has the largest sort of density of population, all the car companies have to embrace the California standards because they consume so many of the vehicles that are sold nationwide. So you guys already know the fact that they came out with a car, I believe in 1996. They then discontinued it in 1999 and got all the cars back by around 2001. Elon actually made the point that the fervor with which people were trying to keep their EV1s was one of the reasons why he got involved with Tesla. As you may also recall, many of the owners of the EV1s, it was only allowed to be a leased vehicle, and then the vehicles were all taken back and crushed, save a few that were sent to museums, etc. Now, part of this evidently was stated that there's a 10 years parts rule. The vehicles were leased and brought back. The GM didn't have to maintain 10 years of parts, and so therefore they could eliminate that sort of tail relative to those EV1s in the process. And so I'm fascinated because we already had one crushing by GM in the 20s of electric vehicles. Then we crushed the EV1s late 1999, early 2000s, and then all of a sudden Toyota's doing its thing with the electric vehicles, and then obviously Tesla was starting up around this time as well. This is really kind of a stunning thing to me to hear of GM being jealous of Toyota when they actually had an electric vehicle that preceded the success that Toyota was enjoying. And so as we move through this isn't so much of a linear show where all the details that are presented sort of show a logical stream that's going on. For example, why would you get jealous of Toyota when you actually had an EV1 and people liked them and you took them away and you crushed them? So this is what I mean by Alzheimer's or dementia that might come from it, is that you have a company whose core philosophy is shifting on the dime, and for the buying public, there are a lot of people that understand the damage that you did with the decisions that you made over time, but you're not sort of going backwards to articulate, hey, what exactly happened, why, and what are you doing? So I further was kind of surprised because I believe but most of the companies right now who are doing hybrid vehicles, that is electric and fuel, are all using Toyota technology. So that was kind of interesting to have GM or Bob Lutz say, well, we wanted to show them we could do something. And what you did was license their technology and start using it in the Volt, and sort of claim that GM was actually moving down the path. And then obviously the Bolt came out afterwards. So after going through this, there's a Bob Lutz statement that keeps ringing in my ear every time we look at what he's doing, what GM is doing. And that is that 3 years ago, Bob Lutz came out and he pointed out that as the Model 3 was having its difficulties on the entry by Tesla, Bob pointed out that there's an interesting fact that we need to face, and that is that GM has announced that by 2021, heading into 2022, GM would have 21 new products to compete with Tesla. So what he indicated is by now, all the major manufacturers in the world had also announced several vehicles that they would be delivering, and all of those deliveries would put Tesla out of business. Obviously, it has not worked out that way. I just watched a program where Ms. Barra, who's the CEO of GM, has articulated they're going to have actually two different, a very high and a very low end electric vehicles that ride on the same, if you will, skateboard, and that the platform that they've developed is capable of handling vehicles of different size all the way through. So that's going to be coming out. Now, I don't think this is bad. I think it's good they're going to have something showing up. What's strange to me, though, is that, how are consumers thinking about things? And one of the biggest think-abouts is, where's your dedicated charger network and vehicles that can be supercharged that mean that I can get in and out in a half hour or less with a decent amount of charge to get to my destination? And the answer to that is it's hard to build dedicated networks if you don't have any cars out there, or the number of vehicles is so low that you can't necessarily cover the cost of installation of these charging facilities. I guess I'm a little bit clueless on this one because GM is such a big company and has such a huge footprint of dealerships, et cetera, around the world, and obviously in the United States. One thing that's a mystery is all they have to do is do a partnership where it's a dedicated charging network for their vehicles with any of the major companies out there, because if they get the dedicated business of those customers from GM, they can afford to build those networks and just bill the customers, and it's not a big deal. I just really have to say that there's a feeling of we're going to do what it takes to give an impression that we're actually doing something, but in reality, we're making an effort that's a losing effort. And so you have to ask questions like, where's your charging network, one? Number two, will the charging network and the vehicles being delivered have supercharging capabilities that allow people to get in and out in fairly short periods of time? And number three, what are other articulations of core competencies being developed in the whole electric arena? For example, GM needs a power wall of some sort where people can come home and start to figure out ways they can work to electrify their homes/vehicles through a device that helps in this process. So there's a lot of matching Tesla's process that's not going on. The other question mark that suggests to me that there's this what's going to happen to GM, Ford a little bit, they are doing some things that are decent, is, I'm just not seeing what Elon and Tesla are doing is lowering their operating costs at every level, especially batteries. And still, right now, GM is in the process of delivering a battery plant in partnership with LG. A very good thing, because it's going to lower their cost of batteries as they share in the cost of that plant. The problem that's happening, though, is that because Tesla is now building its own battery, it has now the capability to deliver a product, i.e. the battery, that is part of their core competency, and they have a cost advantage because they don't share what they're doing with any partners, I guess, other than the supplier for raw material for that battery pack. So this asks the question is, when is GM going to have its own dedicated factories to deliver batteries so they'll be able to compete on a price basis for batteries once they get a form factor going, et cetera? I think that's a couple of years away after they're able to get this first factory done. One of the other interesting sort of data points that was thrown at me by one of our viewers, David, was that when you look at what happened with Trevor Milton and the disaster of that program, as well as Lordstown Motors, it looks as though the core competencies of GM don't include executives that are able to evaluate partnerships that they should or should not get into in terms of their viability. And so therefore, they're still flailing around when time to market, Tesla is rolling into a couple of million vehicles per plant as a direction over the next year and a half. And if that happens and this company is delivering 10, maybe 15 million vehicles a year, you could end up with a situation where there are a lot of companies that are iced out or iced vehicle out of the whole electric space completely. And so I have to say that it was interesting that Bob Lutz raised the issue of 21 vehicles that are ready to go by the end of 2021, because it turns out when you look at all the different variations of Tesla vehicles, they're looking at about 21 different flavors of batteries and car combinations out there. And the combinations are really on the battery side more so than the car side, based on how critical the battery pack size is in terms of range, et cetera, et cetera. So the answer that seems to be happening is that the folks at GM, I definitely see them trying. I see announcements happening, but I really feel like after watching Silicon Valley for many years, there are one or two sort of not correct decisions, or there are a lot of decisions they have to make. And decisions like open source with Linux versus Microsoft or other software, there are all these, what are they going to do about chips? It takes $98 worth of chips to deal with an ICE vehicle. It takes $500 worth of chips to deal with an electric vehicle. So there are all these different ways in which they're going to make decisions over the next year or two that are going to shape the next 10 or 15 years. And if those decisions end up slightly off, they end up out of business. So I am very hopeful that they make it and they do well, but it seems to me that they are in a mode right now, they're doing just enough to say they're doing something, but not enough to show that they're ready to win in the space based on the process that they're laying out that they have going. And I think this is really unfortunate because there are a lot of people's jobs who depend on this process and decision making, and there doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency. So yes, Bob, you're right. 21 different iterations of vehicles are out there for Tesla, and 2 are coming from GM. And they're years away from showing some competitive fire. And I believe that there's a chance that it might be too late already. And I'm hoping that's not the case, because I'd like to see all those workers that rely on those jobs to be okay. But it doesn't seem like you guys are actually hyper-focused on how do we get this done successfully. And, at Lordstown Motors and some of the other things you guys are doing suggest that you're not bringing in the management talent to short and long term manage this whole situation well. And I think it's unfortunate for GM shareholders, et cetera. And I think it puts this company in jeopardy of not being around in the future. At any rate, I want to thank you for taking time to listen in on our Bob Lutz GM Alzheimer's show. And I hope I'm wrong on this, that they're going to deliver something brilliant over the next 6 months to a year that really show them off in a good light. But we haven't seen it so far. And the moves being made kind of make sense, but they're very slow at delivering what needs to happen. So at any rate, I want to thank you for joining us. Just a reminder, this is a copyrighted show. We also want to note that we definitely appreciate your taking the time to like and subscribe. We also are on Patreon if you'd like to join us there for more investing and trading information that'd be helpful in your process. We'd also like to move on to our health tips today. As usual, definitely forest bathing is one of the high recommendations that we would like to make. We also wanted to encourage you to limit to once a week fried foods as a way to avoid health issues that can be generated by it. We also wanted to mention again, a small salad prior to lovemaking might be good as a way to limit blood flow to your stomach. It'll be available for other parts of the body. At any rate, this is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss, German, Salam, Muslim, Hey Do, Swedish, Zdravstvuyte, Russian, Ni hao ma, Chinese, konbanwa, Japanese, arrivederci, Italian, namaste, Hindi, and in Jamaica we say enough respect, walk good man. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day, and bye for now.